So welcome everyone to Workforce Wednesday, Retooling Transitions to College to Meet ELL Student Needs. Our presenter is Christopher Sheffield, and he is an ELL Career Pathways Navigator from Birdsville ISD. And my name is Olga Escamilla, and I'm your host and moderator. We also have Liz Moya, and she will be on with us today. I do want to welcome our presenter. Our presenter is Christopher Sheffield, and he's been with Birdsville Adult Education for 5 years, and he is a career pathway navigator, and he's been a navigator for 3 years, as well as the intensive course specialist and curriculum lead. He earned a master's degree in linguistics, and he has a TESOL certification, and his background is in teaching lower-level ESL students. So at this time, if there's any questions, we could give you answers. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and transfer the presentation over to Christopher and take it away.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. Happy Workforce Wednesday. So I know we have a lot of stuff going on right now. Hopefully, this will give some good information, feedback for plans as we get back started to, get back to normal in the future. And this might be a nice little break from all our distance and remote learning focus. So let's go ahead and get started. So retooling transitions to college to meet ELL students' needs. Okay, so just a little roadmap about the objectives for today. So I'll start off with my motivation for thinking about this topic and some guiding questions. We'll go over relevant policy and guidance. Then we'll talk about how our transitions at Birdsville works. Then we'll go into curriculum components and general framework. Then we'll end on areas for growth and our plans for the future. So my motivation for this, we had been offering a transitions course intended to prepare students for entry into post-secondary education, but this course didn't really seem to be serving our students as well as we thought it could. When we first launched this one, we had just launched our English for Professionals course in the previous semester, and we started to realize that a lot of the skills we were teaching in our first kind of setup for the Transitions to College course, those skills that we were focusing on weren't necessary or weren't as necessary for our population of students, many of which had experience in post-secondary education outside of the U.S. So I start off with a couple of general questions, and these really helped focus what we wanted to do. So first and foremost, which, sometimes it takes me a minute to get to this question, but it's always the most important one. What materials would be relevant and meaningful for the students? Then what could we do to motivate higher level ESL students to exit and really take that next step in their journey? So as we get off and get started here, I have a question for you guys. Are you currently offering a transitions course? And if so, is it targeted specifically for English language learners? Go ahead and post in the chat pod. Let me know what you're doing for transitions. I'll read it out as they come in, and we'll discuss it. I'll take some notes if there's anything we want to talk about and get back started later on as we go through. So what are you guys doing for transitions now? So ESL and HSU there. Charity says she's teaching an ESL level 6 class now. Well, lots of great responses. Students go from that's from Robert, our ESL to a transitions class. Cool. Joseph says, yes, different levels of students. All right, Yvonne says, virtual job shadowing. Wow, that sounds really interesting. And Carrie says, yes, we have a transitions course, and no, it's not targeted for ELLs yet. I want to start supporting them specifically. Great, I think that's a lot of really good feedback there. So for us, our largest population that we work with, we're in the North Fort Worth area in Tarrant County. A lot of our students are high-level ESL learners. So we really focus a lot on working with those students. Doris says, we are just beginning to offer transitions to the college level. We do have a lot of professionals in our systems. Great, I think, well, glad you're here. Hopefully I can help a little bit. Okay? And now I have a second question, a double header here. What do students learn in your transitions class? So it's a little bit different. So for those of you offering transitions now, what are they learning? What might you add to what you're currently doing? Do you have ideas that you're thinking about that maybe I can address here? Or maybe you're just looking for ideas in general to get started. Linda says, no, we do not have a transitions class. Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about what policy and guidance says. we can offer in our different transitions courses, and then I'll talk a little bit about what we do and what you can maybe add to yours. Carrie says, we offer TSI academic preparation and college success skills workshops. Oh, that's great. And Yvonne says, they select careers that they're interested in and the path to that. Excellent stuff. And so from the question before in this one, I have a pretty good feel of where we are here. Joseph says, ongoing, attempting to meet compliance objectives, examples, careers, and that kind of stuff. Great. Manuela says, they get ready for, assuming college and career. That's really our focus here. All right, so if you've been able to join me in some of the other ones, this is always my go-to point here. I always like talking about policy and guidance. So often I'll have ideas for new courses and new kind of things that we can add to our program. It'll be 3 a.m. ideas I have, and the next day I'll immediately go to policy and guidance to see what's there already. And so I have a short link here, so tinyurl.com/twcal-letters. I'm not going to visit it here, but if you're not familiar with where the letters are with all the TWC policy and guidance, this is where they are. Okay? So, when I was going to the office to get my last stuff to work from home, I got my TWCAL letter binder, and I said, I can't work without that, so that's what I took. Also, of course, Googling TWCAL letters is also a really reliable way to find it. So I want to get started with AL letter 216 change 1. If you work in intensive services or you're a CPN as well, you know this letter, front and back. Here are some parts that I took out of it that are specifically targeted towards transitions to college stuff. Okay, so our first point says, transitions to college courses can be preparatory courses designed with the objective of increasing the transition success of participants. And it specifically says NRS levels 4 through 6, so National Reporting System, kind of how we rank our students in terms of ability and skill level. Enrolling in post-secondary education training should be the goals and objectives of these. Then bridge or summer bridge programs also fall under transitions, college onboarding or on-ramp courses, and some development courses. Then we move on to saying that these should be intensive. They may have targeted remediation in core content areas. And this last point here says they may contain college knowledge and workforce preparation activities. We'll talk specifically about what those means as they are defined in policy and guidance. And these should support skills and understanding needed for both gaining admission to and navigating within post-secondary education and training systems. So 216 change 1 is a good layer to start from if you haven't really dipped your toes into offering transitions yet. And I have a note on my slide here to also mention 416 change 1. That's also a really good letter to go to, not necessarily for this, but intensive services and CP and stuff in general. All right, so this next part here, college knowledge as defined in 216 change 1. I've broken this up into 2 slides. So I have great stuff that we really want to focus on in building this course, and then I put in a separate slide stuff that might be okay to offer, but might not be what we want to focus the majority of our time for these students in particular who are advanced level ELL students who may have completed post-secondary education in their countries. So in the policy and guidance, it says stuff you could include it under college knowledge would be the purposes, types, costs, and admission requirements of college, as well as understanding college admissions, application requirements. Students may have completed post-secondary education or started in their countries, but all of these things would be probably significantly different here in the U.S. than where they're coming from. Also, financial aid processes and generally financial aid altogether. College readiness and testing and placement requirements. Again, in a lot of countries, students might go directly from high school into post-secondary education, and it might be more of a fluid system rather than kind of steps that we have here. Then talking about non-credit, credit, and developmental education options. Here, I think that's a really important thing to talk about. So we have these developmental education options. If a student qualifies for developmental ed and they come back to us, we might want to recommend that they stay in AL services rather than going down the developmental course at the college level. And this last one here, adding and dropping courses is something that students may not be familiar with, or it might not be an option that they have in their systems. This next one, this is all good stuff as well, but it might be stuff that we would expect for students who are coming from the HSE side or students who don't have experience in post-secondary education. Now, Eduardo was mentioned in the chat. He said most of the time, electives are non-transferable to some colleges. And talking about that definitely is a really good part, especially here in the U.S., whereas a lot of countries have a nationwide system kind of put in place for universities. Here in the U.S., it can be different college to college and state to state. But back to the slide, here's some okay stuff. So the academic and behavioral expectations of college culture. For our population of students who've spent anywhere from 3 to 8 years in college in their country, they might not need to spend lesson after lesson talking about behavioral expectations in classes. Budget planning as well. This is important. I think everyone can benefit from budget planning, but in terms of our students who, many of whom, immigrated to this country, maybe they're here on a visa, they're having to figure out their finances already. This might be something that they've already developed the skills in doing. So it might not be something where you would have a lesson on budget planning every day, whereas that could be really helpful for students who are from a slightly different population. The same goes for expectations of persistence and attendance. So again, our students who already have post-secondary education experience, this is something they're familiar with. Communication with college faculty and support staff. This is really what I'm thinking. The communication part, of course, English language learners need the extra help with communication, but in terms of this, which is kind of going more in the idea of professionalism, when I have students who are coming from the HSC side or who are just dipping their toes back into education and maybe haven't been there for a while, I might ask that question, for example, of like, do you have a professional email address? Whereas if I have students who were professionals in their country, been working, went to post-secondary education already, their email addresses are probably fine. Communicating in a professional manner is something they're familiar with already. And this last part here kind of drives in this point the best in terms of what are those big differences between a transition for ELL and a transition for other populations. So the culture, challenge, and rigor of post-secondary education and training, in particular, how it's different from high schools, right? So our advanced ELL population, they know how it's different. A lot of them have already gone into post-secondary education. The same with the challenge and rigor of post-secondary education. They're familiar with that. Whereas I remember when I was moving on from a senior in high school into college, all of my teachers really took the opportunity to tell me that, your professors in college aren't going to hold your hand, or you're going to have homework every day. Just wait till you have 3 essays due at the same time. And that was all true. But our advanced ELL students, they already know that. All right, so let me go to the next slide here and hit on one of these last points of policy that I really like. The first one says, where possible, grantees should also document and build on ELL's previous education, credentials, experience, and skills, including education and employment experience from native countries. Now, these are both from AEL Letter 117. That first one is a good one. It just kind of tells us that we can stay on trajectory where students are. We sometimes find students, regardless of the levels, basic or advanced, in kind of a holding pattern where they haven't built the confidence to take that next step. And this piece of guidance really tells us, we can really put the initiative to do that, to take that next step and help students get to that next level where they want to be and building that confidence and doing that. Now, the next piece of guidance, this is what I always like to refer to as the family literacy clause, and it inspires me and helps me think of, that kind of more traditional idea of community-based education. So after going through all the policy here in the EL letter, it says, this does not preclude programs from serving eligible individuals whose primary motivation for participation is to become full partners in the educational development of their children and improve the economic opportunities for their families. And this is also another reason why we offer this class. So for me in particular, I was one of the first people in my family to go into post-secondary education. So I was kind of flying blind a little bit. I couldn't really turn to anyone and ask, what do I do next? What are all these moving parts? For students who might not be interested in returning to post-secondary education themselves, or who are doing fine and they're just wanting to learn the English, if they have kids or if they have family members or relatives, this class really helps give them those materials and skills they need to help other people. Now, I had a student who, she was really successful in her country. She kind of settled down and focused more on the family here. She was a teacher, and so she was very familiar with kind of post-secondary education in her country and didn't really plan on studying more here. But her daughter is, I think she's going to be a junior in high school now. So when she enrolled for this class, after kind of talking about this extra help, it kind of sent that message of, well, you know, it's a little bit different. So maybe the skills we're going to learn in this will not only, you know, help your daughter, but might inspire you to kind of get back in there and see if there are any options for you, even if they're not directly on the credit side. All right, so wrapping up with policy, I have a question here. Can you think of any other important policy which might direct what we're doing? I think I hit on most of the big policy points, but I do remember this is kind of a trick question. But let me see what you guys have. Is there any policy you forgot? I mentioned 416 change one. Can't think if that has any transition stuff in there. Oh, hey, Alicia Washington is here. Hi. I know there's someone out there with your policy Bible, your binder, flipping through pages looking for these keywords. That's also a really good point if you guys don't have that. I've compiled all of my policy letters into a PDF, so it's very easily searchable. No other policy? I can think of one more. ELL guide, good. Good stuff in there too that could have help figure out what will really set the standards and parameters for what we need to be doing. Okay, syllabus in there. Okay, I'm going to go to the next slide. I thought of one. So MSGs. So this comes from policy letter 118 change 1. And this one talks about measurable skills gains. So this would be type 1B. So post-secondary enrollment. MSG type 1B says enrollment in post-secondary education or training program that leads to a post-secondary credential after a participant exits ELL services. The participant must be below the post-secondary level in one or more domains, have no planned gaps, and enroll in post-secondary education or training program after exit, but within the same program year in which the exit occurred. We get a little bit into POPs there at the bottom, but the important part to think here is, again, kind of moving away and seeing our other options that we have for students. So on one side, of course, we have our pre-test, post-test, or baseline progress testing that we can do, but we do have other options here. So finding those other MSGs. I know when we get those students in those holding patterns, especially at the advanced level, you know, you question, well, will this student be able to make a type 1 MSG? Will we be able to get a gain on the test? Has she tested out of Best Plus already? And you think of those kind of things. But another way to consider this and look at what we can do is giving students the option and planning for ourselves. Well, the student's next step is going to college, and we get credit for that in terms of this type 1B MSG. This might be the perfect opportunity and plan for the student to help them reach their next goal. Okay, so next up, I'm going to get into our working model for transitions to college. So I said hi to Ms. Alicia Washington earlier, who joined in, and I can't see if my other colleagues are in the room, but I built this model with Alicia Washington, who is in our program, and Karen Morris. They both jumped in with me to do this. I kind of came with this crazy idea and said, hey, you know this class we've been teaching for 3 years? I want to completely change it. Will you help me? And luckily they said yes, so we were able to build this, and I'm thankful to them for this. So a large part of our population is advanced ELL students, and that's why we built it. And moving on, I'll show you what ours looks like. So going over the course components, in our model, we have basic skills practice, college knowledge, core curriculum practice, which is my favorite part, and TOEFL preparation. Now, we'll talk about each of these sections. So if you're not familiar with, say, TOEFL preparation, we'll talk about what the TOEFL is and what it kind of looks like. In terms of how we have it broken up, I have it right here. We have 24 complete lessons planned. We teach this in roughly 8 weeks. Our classes are usually 3 hours each, and we try to offer this class at least once a year at every site, especially our larger sites with an advanced ESL population. So for our sites, some sites have 6 class hours per week, some have up to 12. So it was designed for our classes with 6 hours per week that were Tuesday, Thursday class. But we also teach the same lessons for the ones that are 12 hours. So it lets the activities breathe a little bit, but it's worked really well at every site that we've done in terms of how we planned it out. We kind of looked at this through a PBL. I don't know if that's still a fun keyword that we're using now, but project-based learning approach in terms of what students get, what are their takeaways in terms of what they can use later on. So upon completion of the course, students will have completed an Applied Texas entry application, not necessarily submitted, but they'll get a paper version and they'll get to work through it. So they have an eye for what it looks like and they have any information that they haven't looked up. And I think actually this is going to get into my linguistics background. I think I did a corpus analysis of the Applied Texas form, so I pulled out all the vocabulary on it. That was fun, I think really helpful, because some of those applications have words that our students do not know. Next, the essay portion of that, so they'll write that out and get a little feedback and help on it, which I think is, going in on that alone might be overwhelming. Next, we had an 8-semester plan of study. So this is something I found really awesome in my school. So I went to undergrad in Arkansas, and everyone had an 8-semester plan. It was great. I think it was really helpful. I've seen some as well here, so I'd like for students to have that. And also looking at financial aid applications. Michelle said a shout out for a corpus analysis. Yes, maybe I can do that. That can be the next talk. Corpus analysis is my favorite tool. But back to this. All right, so we're going to go in piece by piece and talk about all of the course components that we use. So with basic skills, we use these activities normally as warm-ups to get the class started. The literacy activity worksheets, they keep students engaged in the English language skills, and that's because getting into some of these intensive courses, students might question, oh, this is great, but am I learning English? For me, I always tell students, yes, everything we're doing is in English. It's just kind of in a different context than what you're used to, but really having something that's really straightforward in terms of talking about mechanics and just learning the English itself, I think is really helpful. So this kind of sets the tone for the course to kind of get students in the mindset of English language learning. The next part, which might not be as common as a basic skills activity, we actually do a math warm-up to refresh any skills that our students may have forgotten. My teachers in the room might say this as well. Some of my teachers were a little nervous getting into this, doing the math in the class every day, especially in our ESL classes. But it's really helpful, especially for students who are going back into post-secondary education. So it's not as fearful. They're not as fearful when they get into it. Okay, so we do that every day in English language and math skills workup, and I'm going to show you that. So the first one we use is Everyday Edits from educationworld.com. Usually, if you haven't used these, most of our teachers use these already, so they're freely available, and they're error correction practice. Most of them tie in some kind of historical subject, and they all have 10 mistakes. As students are coming in, they each get a copy, they work through it, they find their 10 mistakes, and then we review it. We talk about the topic, of course, and then we talk about the mechanics, and we hit those and kind of analyze what's going on there and correcting errors that may have come up. Most of our teachers in our advanced classes use these even in the standard courses, so it also offers a little bit of continuity. We didn't implement this as a requirement, but a lot of our teachers the word spread throughout our program. So around intermediate level, students start doing these every day, and this kind of helps tie in this class as well. And we have a lot of good links going on in the chat pod right now. Okay, but I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide on this one. So our basic skills warm up for the math section, we use an Algebra 1 summer practice worksheet. We found it from nicholschool.org. So in this one, it's about section by section of all the algebraic topics that you would study. And every day we'll just do one set of problems. It's a little difficult to see here, but when I type the URL, you'll be able to go to the PDF. So the first one's like inequalities, what's greater than, less than, equal to, that kind of stuff. Then it moves on to stuff like simplifying equations. So all those things that if you remember from algebra we kind of studied, it's not so much that it's going to overwhelm students. And the great thing about teaching these advanced students is that there's always an expert. Now, when I go on a little bit later and show you the demo lesson, I'm going to show you a really great tool for this if you're a little bit nervous about the idea of implementing math in an ESL classroom. But I think it's a really good way to kind of implement the math in a way that isn't scary or overwhelming to students or teachers. So if you go to bit.ly/trans_math, it'll take you directly to the PDF. I think there are about 5 pages on there. All right, I'm going to move on to the college knowledge section. So this goes over those topics we talked about before in the policy and guidance section. And I'm going to tell you what we do and kind of give you a demo activity of this. So this section usually consists of an article reading along one of those topics. And then you complete an activity that complements the topic of the article. For example, on one of the first days of class, we'll talk about the U.S. education system and degree types offered here. And one activity that we'll do, after reading the article and discussing the meaning, students will play bingo, where the spaces are acronyms or initialisms for degree types and education system terminology. Then the instructor explains what acronym stands for and what they're called, and students have to remember the definition to claim a bingo. So this is one of my favorite activities. Students will make like little flashcards, one-sided flashcards. They'll have the term on it. You tell them make a 5x5 grid, you know, MA, MED, TOEFL, TESOL, and by doing bingo through that, it kind of reinforces what we've just read about in the article. So this is a really fun activity, and each one of our lessons kind of has this where you learn about the topic, and then we have an activity directly related to what the article was about. So for our college knowledge topics that we talk about throughout the course, this isn't all of them, but it's a good idea for some of them. So core curriculum requirements in Texas, the study plans or 8-semester plans, talking about university departments and roles and what they're responsible for, test taking skills, non-credit offerings, all that kind of stuff. A couple things I want to really shout out and talk about, things that you could include in your classes, is stuff like CLEPs. So I didn't know what CLEPs were, and I didn't do any when I went to university, but so a CLEP is a test that a student can take and they'll get college credit for it. So I like to tell my students about this. They might have a degree from their country and then they come here to the US, they try to study again. Maybe they're from Argentina, and then when they enroll in school, it says that they have to have, 6 hours of a foreign language. Well, instead of spending that time and money on taking those classes, they could take the CLEP. If Spanish or French or whatever is their native language, they're probably proficient enough to save time and money from actually taking this course. So CLEP is a really good one. And also mini-mesters, which, I don't know if it's as much as common. Mini-mester are those short, intense courses, maybe during summer or during winter break. That may not be as common in other countries as they are here. Also, Blackboard or LMSs or learning management systems, textbooks, college entrance essays. These are all things that I think students might not necessarily know about, but could really help to get them going, get them started. So core curriculum practice, like I said, this is one of my favorite parts. So I'm going to talk through these and then show you some examples of what we have going on in our version of this transitions course. So many internationally trained individuals completed degrees which did not require courses outside of their area of study. So in the US, it's relatively unique in its system of general studies. Students who plan to begin or continue studies in the US should know what to expect. And what I mean by that is, someone studying medicine in a different country, maybe all of their classes are directly related to medicine, or if they're studying psychology, the same thing. In the US, our general study system isn't something that we see in other countries so much. In the US, it's really expected that after the first 2 years, you've taken what we would say, basics, and that's, 1 or 2 classes in every subject. And some of our students might not understand why that would be useful. Why does a math major have to take a class in history? I think it's really useful, and we've built this component into our class not only so they can know what to expect, but to expose them to each of these a little bit. So each lesson includes an activity taken from the Texas core curriculum. Before the activity, the student will review the syllabus from the course, and they'll discuss what value they perceive the course to have. Of course, I've said before, there's always an expert in class. So whereas an art major, someone who studied art history in their country may not think that it's really valuable to take an economics course, we'll have an economist in the class who can really defend it. So we actually use the syllabus or the syllabi from Tarrant County College, which is our local college system, and they have really great stuff, and it was pretty easy for me to find on their website, and every college or university probably has somewhere on their website a syllabus for every class that they offer, and I think it's really helpful to go through those things. Okay, so an example of some core curriculum and an activity that we do. So Texas history, speech, music or art appreciation, government history, all of these are classes that we would say are basics, are core classes here in Texas. And just a side note, I said before that I studied in Arkansas, and one of those reasons, and don't hate on me, Texans, is because when I looked at transferring back to Texas and the thought of having to take another Texas history class after studying in elementary school and middle school and high school, I just thought, I'm going to stay in Arkansas and save some time and money. I remember the Alamo, so let me stay here and see if I can finish a little faster. But all these classes are useful, and I think they're fun. I think for our immigrant population in particular, going over some of the history classes and government classes gives them kind of a little bit of insight that they hadn't really pursued much before. So one of our activities is music appreciation. I try to put music into any class I can get it into, but this is a really thorough activity that students do, and it shows them what they might do in a music appreciation class.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but before we move further, would you happen to know how much CLEP tests generally cost?
I don't. I think they're around 200.
Okay.
So I think it's a significant savings compared to enrolling in a class.
Okay. Thank you.
But I don't know the exact price. But that is a wonderful question. I think in our activity we do talk a little bit about it, you know, testing centers, what CLEPs are offered, and that kind of stuff. So it's a great question for us and for students. So for music appreciation, students read an article about how cultural events are often encoded into popular culture, like in music. Then students listen to a controversial song and examine the lyrics. I should say a song that some might find controversial, and examine the lyrics. The instructor leads a conversation using relevant vocabulary from the field. Then students analyze the song and its relevance to the article. So this is a really fun activity. It's kind of what I do with implementing any kind of music into advanced level course. This one is a good example of what students in a music appreciation class might do. I'm going to go to the chat pod here. I think we have an answer to the question. All CLEP exams, Charity says, all CLEP exams cost $85. Wow. The difference of $85 for an exam versus the cost of a class.
$1,200, $1,400.
Right, and that's, you know, a deal. You can get it for that with books and everything. So CLEPs are a really good example. I think one of my colleagues, he took, I think, 3 CLEPs. He's a native Spanish speaker, so he took the Spanish CLEP, so he saved that class. He took a French CLEP because he studied French in high school and was fluent by the time he left. And then he took a psychology CLEP exam just to see if he could pass it, and he did. And, you know, for $85, I think I would wager that on most classes just to see if I could do it. I think I could get through most of them. Like, I took economics, 2 times? I should have just CLEPed out of it. But yeah, really great option. And for this, for example, music appreciation, there may be a CLEP for that. I was in band and did music from 5th grade through high school. I could probably do pretty well in this class at a music appreciation CLEP, if there is one. On the website, they go through what all the different CLEPs are. I'm glad I brought that up. I'm glad I drew attention to that. So that's one thing we can talk about. But yeah, core curriculum subjects, going through these, doing an activity of all of them, and looking at syllabi so students know what to expect when they likely have to do some core curriculum practice. All right, now TOEFL practice. This is another thing you might have heard of before, or you might have seen, or students might have talked to you about. And I'm going to post some links to the TOEFL stuff that we have in a few minutes, so don't get too worried. So what is the TOEFL? So the test of English as a foreign language is a standardized test by ETS. It's used by English-speaking universities to assess the English language skills of non-native speakers. So normally if a student comes in as an international student, to be admitted into the college, they have to have a TOEFL score. So a lot of students think that they have to take the TOEFL. So throughout my career, I've had a lot of questions about TOEFL. How do I study for the TOEFL? Can you help me study for the TOEFL? So that's the reason we implemented into it. Again, it kind of bookends our class. So we start off with the everyday edit to kind of do mechanics parts of of English, and then we do this TOEFL practice at the end of class. That kind of centers the class. So even if we are talking about college knowledge and core curriculum in the middle, beginning and end, we're talking specifically about English language skills, even if it is kind of directed towards a test. That being said, at our local college, for most of our students, it's not required for our students to submit a TOEFL score because they wouldn't enroll as international students. So if you plan on implementing this course and you're thinking about TOEFL practice, you have kind of two things you can do. Either implement TOEFL practice because students want it, or try to make students believe that generally they won't need a TOEFL score. I opted on just teaching TOEFL stuff. I think it was a little bit easier and also really helpful. So talking about the TOEFL practice that we're actually doing. So the test publisher offers a study guide and practice materials online. So that's what we use to study. We group the skills in 2-day sets. So for example, day 4 and 5 might both be listening activities. Day 4 might be for hearing the audio, and then day 5 might be for answering the questions. Depending on what kind of activity you're doing, it might be different in terms of if you can get done in 1 day or so. But writing and reading, those are generally all 2-day activities. Offering this TOEFL practice really raises the rigor of the type of English language knowledge that we usually see in our ESL courses. So TOEFL preparation is academic English. So whereas in a lot of our basic and intermediate classes, we're really focusing on that general communicative English knowledge of, going to the store, going to the doctor, helping kids, talking to your kids, teachers, and that kind of stuff. When we get to this level, this transitions to college course for ELLs, we're really focusing on that academic part. So English for professionals, we're talking more about business side of English. Transitions to college, we're talking more about academic English. So it really gives our students at this level kind of both sides. All right, examples. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I do have an example from each of the 4 sections. So TOEFL has reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And I'm going to type in a little link here to this one. It is bit.ly/TOEFL prep. And then, so if you go to this website, it'll give you some of these activities that you can go through with your students. So this one looks like any kind of standard reading test practice that you've seen before. They have this passage on the right, and then on the left, it's a multiple choice question. The level of reading is a lot higher because it's academic level. It's something that they might read in a textbook, for example. So it's not something we necessarily see too much in our normal classes or in our basic classes. And this gives students the opportunity to dip their toes in the water without fully diving in yet. Down. All right, next one. So listening. So an audio of a conversation plays for a couple of minutes. Then there are questions about the conversation. So maybe a 2-minute clip plays. In this example that I had here, it was a conversation between a student and his professor. They talk about some stuff going on in the program and with some assignments, and then ask questions about it. So that's a really cool activity. All right. And again, these are all freely available on the website. All right. We move on to speaking quickly. Students are given a prompt and time to prepare and then respond. So here I have an example of the prompts that they might go to. There's a rubric that's graded on each one of these sections here, 0 through 4, and it's a general description, delivery, and topic development. And this is what we do. We kind of read, we take turns in the class. The teacher will talk about the prompt and then give students a little bit of time to prepare. And then we'll take any volunteers who would like to share their response or what they would say on the test. So it's pretty fun to do, and it gives students a little bit of practice so they wouldn't be so nervous actually doing it on the test. All right, and the last part we're going to talk about for the TOEFL section is TOEFL practice writing. So this one takes a long time, but I think it really helps students get comfortable with academic writing, in English anyway. So this one gives a prompt, and then they'll have about 30 minutes to write something out. The expectation is 300 words. So what we normally do, maybe we'll talk about and plan on the first day, and the second day we'll be writing, and the teacher will monitor and kind of go around and check and see how it's developing. Then at the end, when we have them written, we'll share them out and talk about what we can improve upon. So I think writing is important for every level, but here focusing on kind of more of an academic side and with having it really flow with some continuity with the rest of the class. Okay, all together now. So I'm going to move on to some examples what we have going on. I know that was a lot of different activities and links and stuff, but I'm going to show you how it all kind of works together. So I know this is hard to see. Okay, so bit.ly/trans_demo-lp should take you to it. Liz, I'm sorry. Thank you. Liz said that the internet will be crashing soon. I'm sorry about all of my links. My teachers actually, when they were helping me with this, we did everything planning through hyperlinks. So they got familiar with using hyperlinks, and as you can see, all these blue on the screen, those are all hyperlinks to the activities that we're doing. So I am a child of the internet, and it's coming in handy now is what I should say. All right, so just going through this is our standard lesson plan template that we use in our program, and which is adopted by some of our partners in our consortium. So authors program, email, all that kind of stuff. In the middle here, this might be a really good section if you're planning on doing something with a lot of these different components. So keywords, that makes it searchable. So if I ever need to find a lesson plan on note-taking, I can just type it in on Google Drive and I can find my lesson plan about note-taking because it has the keywords here. Then we have the basic skills part in the middle, and that shows a little checkbox for each of the components entered in. Workforce prep. We don't necessarily use those so much for this class, but this is also a lesson plan template that we use for IT, so it's very important to check off workforce preparation for those. Okay, so I'm going to kind of walk you through these activities here. Okay, I'm going to share my screen, so it's going to change in just a second. Don't freak out. Before we started using these, doing this remote learning, I didn't consider warning people about sharing screens. And after working with students in distance learning, I found that it's a really great idea to warn people when the screen is being shared. All right, can you guys see my day 6 lesson? Okay, so if you follow the link, someone will confirm for me that it's there.
I'm seeing transition ELL.
Google
so there's people in there.
There are so many people. Thank you, guys. Aww. I think I edited the access so you can download this and copy and paste and stuff. I do have acknowledgments here for my teachers who helped me develop this. But just to walk you through over a couple minutes, I know it's a lot. A shout out again, so I do have the benchmarks here. I know my teachers sometimes get frustrated that I always ask for benchmarks that are directly relevant to the activities, but just to reassure you guys, I do them on my lesson plans too. So previous day lesson curriculum, I'm going to go right here down to the activities. So intro and overview, we'll just talk about the previous day as students are going in, answering any questions, and kind of catch up stuff there. Then we'll do the everyday edit. This is an actual link to the everyday edit that we're using for the day. Makes it a little bit easier to print off and be prepared for class. The everyday edit depends on when the class is being taught because they're grouped by month. You know, if I'm teaching the class in October, I don't want to use an everyday edit that's intended for May because it might align to like a holiday or something. Then the math warm-up. What we've done for the math warm-up, we've actually divided each of the questions and have them on their separate page, so we can do a handout of that with just one question on it. If you did the whole packet at once, there would be at least 3 students who went home and did the whole thing in one day. Okay, I'm going to go to this tool here that I had under math warm-up. So it's a solutions calculator. So symbolab.com. Share this with all your friends. Don't share it with K-12 students. All right, so this is the first math problem that we do. You can put in a whole fraction here, and it'll give you the answer and the steps. I don't know if anyone else knew about this, but I was blown away when I saw this. I mean, I really wasn't a great student in high school, but I can't imagine how different the results would have been if I would have had this. I was also really bad about showing my work. I always said, well, I can do it. Why do I have to show my work? I got the right answer, didn't I? As a teacher, I understand now. But yeah, so that's symbolab.com. So we'll review and discuss that. Then we'll move on to our next activities. So here we're talking about note-taking. How do you take notes now? I think it's different in English in that they might have done their other language. And for example, on this slideshow that I linked here, they might see some note-taking styles that they haven't seen before or didn't learn about. So that is our college knowledge section. Then step 4 here is our core curriculum practice. So we're doing micro econ. We have a hyperlink here. It talks about supply and demand. I have some leading questions. These are here for me. My teachers, are all great teachers, so they know what to do. But I always like to have these, and it kind of guides me through the lesson. So then at the actual activity, they can click on this, print out the activity. The teacher will explain briefly supply and demand, but we also ask if there are any experts in the class. I say right here. And if they are, maybe the student can share that knowledge and help you out. So you know that you have someone there to kind of align what you're doing. And they'll read the syllabus, all that kind of stuff. I always have to remind myself in the lesson plan to take a break, or at least offer a break to students who need it. And then lastly, we finish up with TOEFL practice. Just lesson plan template, handouts as part of it, evaluation. I use collaborative discussions as evaluations. In my IETs, those are actual questions. Here, I just like to talk about how students feel. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. You ready? Okay, we should be back to the chat.
You're back.
All right, cool. So much stuff in the chat yet. No, yes, cool. Okay, Symbol Lab, thank you, Training PD. So, CLEPS, Symbol Lab, and this lesson plan template. Those are some good takeaways. Okay, so that's how we do with the lesson plan, but I want to hit on a couple things here. I'm going to give maybe 30 seconds for this question. I'm going to talk about where we want to grow and what we want to implement. Do you think you can integrate any of what we discussed today into what you're currently doing?
Yes, definitely, yes. So you got absolutely yes. I really like the whole CLEP. That's not something that we think about, but that sure would save individuals quite a bit of money. Carrie says yes. I really like the detailed information about the core curriculum for our students. Absolutely, wealth of choices.
Oh,
yes,
thank you, guys. I'm glad there's some useful stuff. And if I talked quickly, it's because I went over yesterday while I was doing a run through, and also I've had a lot of caffeine today. But I'm glad that we found some useful stuff. So when we talk about CLEPs, I also like to mention AP classes, just in case you have any parents in there who have students like that student I talked about before, Ms. Maria. She's at one of our afternoon classes. So I talk about CLEPs and AP classes. So she wondered, should I let my daughter take this dual credit course? Yes, you'll save money and time. And Susan says she likes reviewing the college syllabi. Definitely. That was one of those aha moments. I was thinking, what could be contextualized reading to tell students what's in this class? Oh, the syllabus. One of those very simple solutions. So I liked that one as well. So good to see on that one. So is there anything your students want which you're unclear about whether it's allowable? This question is basically talking about TOEFL. So when we first started thinking about integrating TOEFL, we didn't know if it was allowed. Yes, as long as the activities you're doing can be tied or related to another policy standard somewhere in terms of, are they learning English? Is it basic skills? Then yes, is the general answer. You can always go kind of up the chain and ask that and make sure and get clearance. But that's really what it comes down to with offering things like TOEFL. I think the policy letters that have come out over the last 2 years specifically talk about TSIA and stuff like that. But as long as they're eligible for adult ed services and the services we provide fit under this, we'll get there. Okay, so are they transitioning? I'm going to hit over these points quickly. So this class has given us an opportunity to reach out to upper level ESL students who didn't think we could offer that, who thought that they had advanced beyond our program. But we do think that students might not have the confidence yet to move on to that next step of post-secondary education. And the reason we think that is because we've kind of lost track of really having enough guest speakers as well as getting students onto those campuses. So that's the next part of what we want to do, is get students on campuses, bringing guest speakers from the colleges, and not only talk about it in theory, but kind of put in their practice and solidify what those plans could be. There's some additional components about using Blackboard and a learning management system. So that's a really good idea, especially right now. What could you do about integrating a learning management system for your students? It's a good idea to really get them going and have some experience, since a lot of classes are remote or distance learning now. Once they get into the college level or post-secondary education, we can expect a lot more of this stuff. So I'm going to wrap up there. If you have any questions for me, this is my email address, christopher.sheffield@burnettvilleschools.net. It's a really long email, but I always say if you can spell my first name right, you can find me. Christopher@gmail, Christopher@Yahoo. I'll get back to you if you find me on Instagram. It's also Christopher. Send me a message, and I'll see what I can do to help. So thank you guys all so much.
Thank you so much, Christopher. Please scroll back 2 screens.
Oh, you want to see my weakness? No. Yeah, these are the things that I want to kind of work on here in our next class. And these might be things, I've learned from getting to share with colleagues at intensive, when we meet for CPN meetings or when we have a lot of people working in intensive services getting together. I think we have a lot more problems and a lot more similar challenges and opportunities, places where we can grow than we recognize. So I'm happy to share these things that we're working with. A lot of our students who go through these classes, in our largest site, we do a standard advanced ESL course in the first semester, and the second semester is divided between ESL for professionals, then transitions, and it kind of step by step gets them where we want them to go. And a lot of our students will move from these advanced courses, and instead of into college or university, they'll go into an IAT, which is really reasonable for a lot of our students. So there's a lot of good stuff here. All right, thank you guys. I see a lot of thank yous in here. I really appreciate you guys for being here. Hang in there. So people watching in the future, it's April 2020, so
we have a lot of people hanging on. Thank y'all so much. Thank you, Christopher, for going back and reviewing that slide. We appreciate it. We appreciate you taking the time to present and share all this great information. We got a lot of great, useful information that we can use to transfer to our program. So thank you so much. We appreciate the sharing of all this information.